Jake Collins lay on the cold metal floor. His hands were tied behind his back with thick rope. Blood ran down from a cut on his forehead. The alien ship hummed around him as it flew through space. 3 months ago, Jake had been fixing broken machines in Denver. He was good with his hands and loved solving problems. He had a small apartment and a job he enjoyed. Life was normal then. That was before the aliens came. The Kethra arrived on a Tuesday morning. Their huge ships blocked out the sun. They landed in every major city on Earth. The world's armies tried to fight them, but the aliens were too strong. Their weapons could destroy entire buildings with one shot. Their soldiers wore armor that bullets could not pierce. In just 2 weeks, Earth surrendered. The governments had no choice. It was surrender or watch every city burn. Jake remembered watching the news that day. The president stood at a podium, tears in his eyes. "We must accept their terms," he said. "We must survive." But Jake could not accept it. Neither could millions of other humans. They formed resistance groups. They hid in forests and old buildings. They made bombs and attacked alien supply trucks. Jake used his engineering skills to help them. He knew how to make things explode. That was how he ended up here, tied up on an alien ship. The mission had seemed simple. A convoy of alien trucks would drive through the mountains. Jake and 5 other humans would plant bombs on the road. When the trucks hit the bombs, they would explode. The aliens would lose food and weapons meant for their bases. But someone had told the aliens about the plan. Jake never found out who. Maybe it was fear. Maybe someone thought they could buy safety by betraying their own people. It did not matter. Now, the aliens had been waiting. They caught Jake and killed the others. Now he was alone, flying to some alien prison. The ship shuddered as it landed. Heavy footsteps echoed outside Jake's cell. The door slid open with a hiss. 2 alien soldiers walked in. They were tall, maybe 8 feet high. Their skin was purple and covered in scales. They had 4 arms each, all ending in sharp claws. Their faces looked like a mix of lizard and insect. Yellow eyes stared down at Jake with no emotion. "Get up, human," one of them said in broken English. Its voice sounded like grinding metal. Jake struggled to his feet. His legs were weak from the long flight. The aliens grabbed his arms and dragged him out of the cell. They walked through long corridors filled with bright white light. Other aliens passed by, all wearing the same dark uniforms. Some stopped to stare at Jake. A few made sounds that might have been laughter. Finally, they reached a large room. It had high ceilings and walls covered in alien symbols. At the far end sat a desk made of black stone. Behind it stood the most frightening alien Jake had ever seen. This one was different from the others. Her skin was darker purple, almost black. Scars covered her arms and face in patterns that looked like some kind of art. She wore a uniform with many badges and symbols. 4 swords hung from her belt, 1 for each arm. Her yellow eyes locked onto Jake's. When she smiled, he could see rows of sharp teeth. "I am Commander Zarath," she said. Her English was much better than the soldiers. "You are the human terrorist, Jake Collins." It was not a question. She already knew who he was. "I am Jake Collins," he said. "But I'm not a terrorist. I'm a freedom fighter." Zarath walked around her desk. Each step echoed in the large room. "Freedom." She repeated the word like it tasted bad. "Humans speak much of freedom, but you do not understand what freedom means." She stopped in front of Jake. Even though he was tall for a human, she towered over him. "Freedom is what the strong take from the weak," she said. "We Kethra are strong. You humans are weak. Therefore we are free and you are slaves. This is the natural order." Around the room, other aliens watched. Some were soldiers. Others looked like officers. All of them stared at Jake with the same cold eyes. "Your people fought us for 2 weeks," Zarath continued. "Then they gave up. They begged us not to kill them all. They promised to serve us. This is proof that humans are a weak species." Jake said nothing. He had heard this speech before from other aliens. They all seemed to believe the same thing. But some humans... Zarath's voice grew colder. refuse to accept reality. They hide. In holes like rats, they plant bombs and kill Kethra soldiers. They think they can win a war they already lost. She grabbed Jake's chin with one clawed hand, forcing him to look at her. These humans must be taught their place. They must learn to bow before their betters. They must be broken. Zareth let go of Jake and walked back to her desk. She picked up something from its surface. It was a small device that looked like a remote control. "Bring in the others," she said. A door on the side of the room opened. More alien soldiers marched in, pushing a group of human prisoners. Jake counted 12 of them. They were all dirty and thin. Their clothes were torn. Some had bruises and cuts. These were other resistance fighters who had been caught. Jake recognized a few faces. There was Bill, an old farmer who had joined the resistance after aliens burned his crops. There was Mary, a young woman who had been a nurse before the invasion. Her brother had been killed in the first attacks. The aliens forced the human prisoners to kneel in a line facing Jake. Fear filled their eyes. They had been here longer than Jake. They knew what was coming. "These humans have been learning their lessons," Zareth said. "They understand now that resistance brings only pain. Watch them closely, Jake Collins. Soon you will be like them." She pressed a button on the device in her hand. The kneeling humans suddenly screamed in pain. Their bodies shook and twisted. Jake realized they all wore metal collars around their necks. The device was shocking them. After 10 seconds that felt like hours, Zareth released the button. The humans fell forward, gasping and crying. "Stand up," she commanded. The prisoners slowly got to their feet. Their legs shook, but they obeyed. Now, Zareth looked at Jake. "You will learn your first lesson in obedience." She walked over to stand directly in front of him. Her boots were made of some kind of black leather that gleamed in the bright lights. "Kneel," she said. Jake remained standing. "Kneel before your commander," Zareth repeated, her voice harder now. Jake looked around the room. All the aliens watched him. The human prisoners stared with wide, frightened eyes. He could see them silently begging him to obey. They did not want to watch him suffer. Jake looked back at Commander Zareth. Her yellow eyes burned with cruel anticipation. "No," Jake said quietly. The room went completely silent. Even the humming of the ship's engines seemed to stop. Zareth's eyes widened in surprise. Clearly, she had not expected this answer. "What did you say?" she asked. Jake straightened his shoulders and looked her directly in the eyes. "I said no. I won't kneel. I'm a human being, and human beings don't bow to tyrants." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Zareth began to laugh. It was a harsh, cruel sound that echoed off the walls. "Interesting," she said. "It has been a long time since I met a human with such spirit. This will make breaking you much more enjoyable." She walked back to her desk and sat down. "Take him to cell block 7, she told the soldiers. "I have special plans for this one." The aliens grabbed Jake's arms again. He took one last look at the other human prisoners. In their eyes, he saw something new mixed with the fear. It was hope. The soldiers dragged Jake away, but his words echoed in the silence he left behind. "Human beings don't bow to tyrants." Commander Zareth stared at the door long after it had closed behind them. Something about the humans' defiance bothered her in a way she could not understand. This Jake Collins would be an interesting challenge. Jake's new cell was different from the one on the ship. The walls were made of some kind of clear crystal that glowed with a soft blue light. The floor was smooth and cold. There was no bed, no chair, nothing but empty space. When the alien soldiers pushed him inside, Jake noticed something strange. Every sound he made seemed louder in this room. When he walked, his footsteps echoed like thunder. When he breathed, it sounded like wind through a tunnel. "This is a punishment cell," one of the soldiers explained with that grinding voice. "The crystals make every noise bigger. Soon, even your heartbeat will drive you crazy." They left Jake alone. The door sealed shut with no handle on the inside. He was trapped in a box of glowing crystal and amplified sound. Jake sat down in the corner and tried to think. The crystal wall showed his reflection from every angle. Hundreds of Jakes stared back at him. His own breathing filled the room like the sound of ocean waves. Hours passed, maybe days. Without windows, Jake could not tell time. The blue glow never changed. The only sounds were the ones he made himself. The aliens brought him food once, a bowl of gray paste that tasted like metal. They gave him water in a cup so small he could finish it in 2 sips. When he asked for more, the guards just laughed. "Hungry human?" one guard asked. "Tell Commander Zareth you are sorry. Tell her you will lick her boots. Then maybe you get more food." Jake handed back the empty bowl. "Tell Commander Zareth I'm still a human being." The guard's eyes flashed with anger, but he said nothing. The aliens left Jake alone again. More time passed. Jake's stomach hurt from hunger. His lips were dry and cracked. The constant echo of his own breathing made his head pound. But he did not call for the guards. He did not beg for mercy. Instead, Jake started to exercise. He did push-ups, counting each one out loud. The numbers bounced off the crystal walls like gunshots. He did sit-ups until his muscles burned. He ran in place, his footsteps sounding like a drumbeat. The noise was awful, but Jake realized something important. If the crystal made his sounds louder, maybe other prisoners could hear him. Maybe they would know that someone was still fighting. So Jake kept making noise. He sang songs his mother had taught him. He recited poems he learned in school. He told stories to the empty room about better days before the aliens came. On the 3rd day, something new happened. As Jake was doing his morning exercises, he heard a sound from outside his cell. It was faint, but it sounded like tapping. 3 short taps, then 3 long ones, then 3 short ones again. Jake knew that pattern. It was Morse code for SOS, the old emergency signal. Someone was answering him. He walked to the wall and tapped back. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Then he tapped out a message. "Jake here, stay strong." The answer came back quickly. "Mary here, we hear you." Mary, the nurse from the first day. Jake smiled for the first time since his capture. He was not alone. From that day on, Jake and the other prisoners talked through the walls. They tapped messages to each other in code. They shared memories of home. They told jokes to keep their spirits up. They planned and hoped and refused to give up. The crystal cell made Jake's tapping sound like hammer blows. The alien guards heard it too. They came to his cell, angry and confused. "Stop making noise," they demanded. "I'm just talking to my friends," Jake said calmly. "You have no friends here. You are alone." Jake smiled. "I have friends everywhere. That's something you aliens will never understand." The guards reported to Commander Zareth. She came to visit Jake's cell herself. Through the crystal walls, she looked even more frightening. Her forearms were crossed. Her scarred face showed no emotion. "You will stop this behavior," she told him. "What behavior?" Jake asked. "Talking? Breathing? Being human? You will stop encouraging the other prisoners. You will submit to Kethra. Authority." Jake stood up slowly. Even though the crystal wall separated them, he could see that Zareth stepped back slightly. "I will never submit to you," Jake said. "And neither will they. We're human beings, we don't break that easily." Zareth's eyes narrowed. "We shall see." The next day, the guards came for Jake. They dragged him back to the large room where he had first met Zareth. The other human prisoners were there again, kneeling in their line. But now Jake could see what days of imprisonment had done to them. They were thinner than before. Their clothes were dirtier. Some had new bruises and cuts. But when they saw Jake, something changed in their faces. They sat up straighter. Their eyes looked clearer. "Your friend has been causing trouble," Zareth told the kneeling humans. "He refuses to learn his place. He fills your minds with false hope." She walked over to Mary, the nurse who had been tapping messages with Jake. Mary was small and young, maybe 25 years old. Before the invasion, she had helped sick children at a hospital. "This one has been especially troublesome," Zareth said. She pulled out the shock device. "Perhaps watching her suffer will teach Jake Collins about the cost of defiance." She pressed the button. Mary screamed as electricity coursed through her collar. Her body twisted in pain. The other prisoners watched in horror. Jake felt like someone had stabbed him in the chest. Every muscle in his body wanted to rush forward and help Mary, but the alien soldiers held him tight. "Stop!" Jake shouted. "Leave her alone!" Zareth released the button. Mary fell forward, gasping and shaking. "Will you kneel now, Jake Collins?" Zareth asked. Jake looked at Mary. Blood ran from her nose. Her hands shook as she tried to sit up. But she turned to look at Jake, and in her eyes he saw something that surprised him. She was not begging him to give in. She was asking him to stay strong. "No," Jake said. "I won't kneel." Zareth pressed the button again. Mary screamed louder this time. The sound echoed through the room like a siren. "Stop it," Jake yelled. "Please." The torture went on for what felt like hours. Mary would collapse. Then Zareth would wait for her to recover, then shock her again. The other prisoners cried as they watched. Some begged Zareth to stop, but Mary never asked Jake to give in. Every time she could breathe again, she would look at him with those brave eyes. She was telling him not to surrender. Finally, Zareth stopped. Mary lay on the floor, barely conscious. "Take her to the medical bay," Zareth ordered. "We don't want her to die too quickly." As the guards carried Mary away, she managed to whisper something. Only Jake was close enough to hear it. "Stay strong." Zareth turned back to Jake. "Tomorrow we will continue this lesson. Perhaps you will be wiser then." They took Jake back to his crystal cell. That night he tried to tap messages to the other prisoners, but no one answered. Either they were too hurt to respond, or the guards had moved them to different cells. Jake sat in his glowing prison and thought about Mary. She was suffering because of his choices. Maybe he should give in. Maybe he should kneel and lick Zareth's boots. It would end the pain for everyone. But then he remembered Mary's eyes. She had not wanted him to surrender. She had wanted him to keep fighting, even if it meant more pain for her. Jake understood something then. This was not really about him anymore. It was about all of them. Every human who refused to give up their dignity. If he broke now, it would tell the aliens that any human could be broken with enough cruelty. But if he stayed strong, it would prove something important. It would prove that the human spirit could not be destroyed. It would give hope to every prisoner, every resistance fighter, every person who still believed in freedom. Jake made his choice. He would not kneel. Not for Mary's pain, not for his own, not for anything. He began to tap on the wall again. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short SOS. After a few minutes, an answer came back. It was weak and shaky, but it was there. Mary here, still fighting. Jake smiled through his tears. They were all still fighting. In her office, Commander Zareth stared at reports from the guards. The human prisoners were getting harder to control, not easier. Work productivity had dropped by 30%. There had been 3 escape attempts in the past week, and it was all because of one stubborn human who refused to kneel. Zareth had broken hundreds of prisoners from dozens of different species. She had never failed before. The thought of failing now made her angry in a way she had never experienced. Tomorrow she would try something different. Tomorrow she would find Jake Collins's weakness and crush it. But as she planned new tortures, Zareth could not shake the memory of the human's eyes. There had been no fear in them, no hatred. There had been something else, something she could not name. It bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Commander Zareth could not sleep. She paced back and forth in her private quarters, her 4 arms moving restlessly. Every few minutes she would stop and stare at the wall screen showing Jake's cell. The human was doing exercises again. Push-ups, sit-ups, running in place. His movements created a constant drumbeat of noise that echoed through the crystal walls. Other prisoners in nearby cells had started exercising too. The whole prison block sounded like a war drum. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's arrival. 3 weeks of defiance that was spreading like a disease through the prison. Zareth had tried everything she could think of. She had starved Jake until he was so weak he could barely stand. But he still refused to kneel. She had tortured other prisoners in front of him. Each scream tore at Jake's heart, but he would not submit. She had put him in complete darkness for days. When the guards brought him out, blinking and pale, he still stood straight and proud. She had tried bribes, better food, a real bed, even freedom for the other prisoners. Jake just looked at her with those calm eyes and said, "Human beings don't make deals with tyrants." Nothing worked. Worse, Jake's example was making the other humans stronger. They worked slower in the factories. They broke tools on purpose. They sang human songs while they labored, filling the alien facilities with sounds of home and hope. Zarath's superior officers were starting to ask questions. High Commander Vexitar had sent her 3 messages demanding explanations for the drop-in productivity. Other Kethra bases were reporting similar problems with human prisoners who had heard about Jake Collins. One human, Zarath muttered to herself. How can one weak human cause so much trouble? But she knew Jake was not weak. She had seen him endure pain that would break most Kethra warriors. She had watched him comfort other prisoners even when he was starving. She had heard him tell stories through the walls, keeping everyone's spirits up. The human had a strength that Zarath did not understand. It was not physical strength. She could crush Jake with one hand. It was not intelligence. The Kethra had superior technology and tactics. It was something else, something that seemed to come from deep inside him. Zarath decided she needed to understand this strength before she could break it. She began studying human culture and psychology. She read reports about Earth's history, about human wars and heroes. She learned about something humans called principles, ideas they would die for rather than abandon. The more she learned, the more confused she became. Humans were clearly a weak species. They had no natural armor, no claws, no poison. They could not even survive in most environments without artificial help. Yet their history was full of stories about individuals who stood against impossible odds and somehow won. There was a human named Rosa Parks who refused to give up her seat on a bus. That simple act had changed an entire society. There was a man named Gandhi who defeated the mighty British Empire using nothing but peaceful resistance. There were countless soldiers who had thrown themselves on grenades to save their friends, students who had stood in front of tanks, ordinary people who had hidden refugees at the risk of their own lives. None of these humans had been physically powerful, but they had possessed something that made them stronger than armies. Zarath was beginning to suspect that Jake Collins possessed the same thing. She needed more information. She called for her intelligence officer, a thin Kethra named Sekalon, who specialized in gathering data about prisoners. "Tell me about the human Jake Collins," she ordered. "I want to know everything about his life before the invasion." Sekalon consulted his datapad. Age 28, born in Denver, North America. Parents died in a vehicle accident when he was 16, raised by his older sister, Amy Turner. Sister? Zarath's interest sharpened. Where is she now? Amy Turner is a prisoner at Facility 7, approximately 200 kilometers from here. She was captured last month while treating wounded resistance fighters. She is a medical doctor. Zarath smiled for the first time in days. She had found Jake's weakness. "Bring Amy Turner here," she ordered, immediately. "Yes, Commander. Should I prepare a standard prisoner transport?" "No. I want her brought in perfect condition, no injuries, no mistreatment, and tell the guards to address her as Dr. Turner. I want her to arrive with some dignity and tact." Seklon looked confused but nodded. "As you command." 2 days later, Amy Turner arrived at Zarath's facility. Jake's sister was 32 years old, with the same dark hair and brown eyes as her brother. She was thin from imprisonment, but held herself with quiet strength. When the guards brought her before Zarath, she showed no fear. "Dr. Turner," Zarath said politely, "thank you for joining us." Amy said nothing. She studied Zarath with the careful eyes of someone who had learned not to trust alien kindness. "I understand you are a healer," Zarath continued. "Your people have great need of healers these days." "What do you want?" Amy asked simply. "I want to give you a chance to help your brother." For the first time, emotion flickered across Amy's face. Jake? Is he here? He is, and he is being very foolish. Perhaps you can convince him to be more reasonable. Zarath led Amy to a viewing room with a one-way window. On the other side, Jake was in his crystal cell. He was thinner than Amy, remembered, and there were bruises on his face and arms, but he was doing his exercises, counting out loud in a strong voice. Amy pressed her hand against the window. Tears ran down her cheeks. What have you done to him? She whispered. Less than I could have, Zarath replied. Your brother refuses to show proper respect to his captors. This causes problems for everyone. Other prisoners suffer because of his defiance. Amy watched Jake finish his push-ups and start doing sit-ups. Even through the crystal walls, she could hear him counting. His voice was hoarse, but determined. He looks stronger than I expected, Amy said quietly. Zarath was surprised by this response. She had expected Amy to be horrified by her brother's condition. He has been tortured for weeks, Zarath said. He could end his suffering with a simple gesture of submission. Amy turned to look at her. You don't understand Jake at all, do you? What do you mean? Jake has been taking care of people his whole life. When our parents died, he worked 2 jobs to put me through medical school. When the aliens invaded, he joined the resistance to protect strangers he'd never met. Suffering doesn't break Jake. It makes him stronger, because he knows he's suffering for something important. Zarath felt a chill run down her spine. And what is important enough to endure such pain? Amy looked back through the window at her brother. The belief that some things matter more than comfort, that dignity is worth more than safety, that one person standing up to bullies can inspire others to stand up too, even if it means death, especially if it means death. Amy's voice was soft but certain. Jake would rather die as a free man than live as a slave, and nothing you do to him will change that. Zarath stared at the human woman. There was no anger in Amy's face, no hatred, just a calm certainty that shook Zarath to her core. Tomorrow, Zarath said, you and your brother will be reunited, and we will see how strong his principles are when someone he loves is at risk. Amy nodded. You'll see. That night, Zarath could not concentrate on her work. She kept thinking about Amy's words. How could these humans be so calm about death? How could they value abstract ideas more than their own lives? In Kethra culture, survival was everything. Honor meant being strong enough to protect yourself and your family. The idea of choosing death over submission was not heroic. It was insane. But Jake Collins was not insane. Neither was his sister. They were both intelligent, rational people who had made a choice that Zarath could not comprehend. She decided to watch Jake through the night, hoping to understand him better. Through the security monitors, she saw him tap messages to other prisoners. She saw him exercise when he should have been sleeping. She saw him use his shirt to clean water dripping from the ceiling, water that he then shared with insects that had somehow gotten into his cell. Even in prison, even while being tortured, Jake was still taking care of others. He was still choosing kindness over cruelty, hope over despair. For the first time in her life, Zarath began to doubt herself. What if she was wrong? What if strength was not about having power over others? What if real strength was about refusing to let others have power over you? She shook her head, angry at her own thoughts. She was a Kethra warrior. She had conquered dozens of worlds. She would not be confused by one stubborn human. Tomorrow she would break Jake Collins once and for all. She would torture his sister in front of him until he begged for mercy. She would prove that human principles were nothing but weakness disguised as virtue. But even as she planned Amy's torture, Zarath could not forget the calm certainty in the human woman's eyes. Amy had not been afraid of pain or death. She had been proud of her brother. What kind of species produced people like this? And what did it mean that the Kethra were fighting them? For the first time, Zarath wondered if the Kethra were the villains in this war. The thought terrified her more than any enemy she had ever faced. The next morning, Jake was brought to the main chamber. He had not been told why, but he could sense that something different was happening. More guards than usual lined the walls. Commander Zareth sat behind her desk, her 4 hands folded, carefully in front of her. The other human prisoners knelt in their usual line, but today they looked more afraid than Jake had ever seen them. Mary, the nurse, caught his eye and shook her head slightly. She was trying to warn him about something. "Today will be a special day, Jake Collins," Zareth announced. "Today you will learn the true cost of your stubbornness." She gestured to the guards by the side door. They opened it and marched in, bringing with them a new prisoner. Jake's heart stopped. It was Amy. His sister looked thin and tired, but she was unharmed. When she saw Jake, her face lit up with a mixture of joy and worry. She had not seen him since before his capture, and the changes in his appearance clearly shocked her. "Jake!" she called out, taking a step toward him. The guards caught her arms and held her back, but she kept looking at her brother with love and concern. "Amy," Jake whispered. His voice was rough with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to get caught up in this." "I'm not sorry," Amy replied firmly. "I'm proud of you." Zareth watched this exchange with interest. She could see the bond between the siblings, the way they looked at each other with complete trust and affection. "How touching," she said, standing up. "A family reunion, but I'm afraid it will not be a happy one." She walked over to Amy and circled around her slowly, studying her like a scientist examining a specimen. "Dr. Amy Turner," Zareth said. "Healer of the sick, helper of resistance fighters, sister to the most stubborn human I have ever encountered." Amy said nothing, but her eyes never left Zareth's face. "Your brother has caused me considerable trouble," Zareth continued. "He refuses to show proper respect. He encourages other prisoners to rebel. He has cost me the confidence of my superior officers." "Good," Amy said quietly. Zareth's eyes flashed with anger. "You think this is good? You think it is good that your brother's actions have led to increased punishment for all prisoners? You think it is good that you yourself are now here, facing torture and death?" Amy looked over at Jake. Her brother was staring at her with desperate eyes, silently begging her to be careful. "Jake," Amy said, ignoring Zareth completely, "do you remember the song Mom used to sing when we were scared?" Jake's eyes filled. With tears, he nodded. "I remember," he said. Zareth stepped between them. "Enough sentiment," she snapped. "It is time for your final lesson, Jake Collins." She pulled out a new device. Not the simple shock controller she had used before, but something larger and more complicated. Multiple cables and wires extended from it. "This is a neural disruptor," she explained. "It does not simply cause pain. It attacks the nervous system directly, causing damage that can be permanent. Paralysis, blindness, loss of memory. The effects depend on how long the device is used." Jake felt ice form in his stomach. He had endured his own torture because he could recover from it, but Amy was not trained for this kind of suffering. She was a healer, a gentle person who had spent her life helping others. "Please," Jake said, hating himself for the word. "Don't hurt her. She hasn't done anything wrong." "But you have," Zareth replied, "and she is the price of your defiance." The guards forced Amy to her knees. They attached the cables to a metal collar they placed around her neck. The device hummed with dangerous energy. "I will give you one final chance," Zareth told Jake. "Kneel before me, lick my boots clean, submit completely to Kethra authority. Do this, and your sister goes free." Jake looked at Amy. She was scared. He could see it in her eyes, but she was not broken. She was looking at him with the same expression she had worn when their parents died, when she had told him they would get through the tragedy together. "Jake," Amy said softly, "remember who you are. Remember who you are." It was something their father used to say. He had been a good man who worked hard and treated everyone with kindness. He had taught his children that dignity was something no one could take away unless you gave it to them. Jake looked at Zareth. Then he looked at the other human prisoners. They were all watching him, waiting to see what he would choose. Finally, Jake spoke. "I remember who I am," he said. "I'm a human being. I'm Amy's brother. I'm the son of parents who taught me that some things are worth more than safety. He straightened his shoulders. I won't kneel. Not to save Amy. Not to save myself. Not to save anyone. Because if I kneel, then everything Amy and I believe in dies with that act. Amy smiled through her tears. That's my brother, she said proudly. Zareth's face twisted with rage. Then watch her suffer for your pride. She activated the neural disruptor. Amy's scream filled the room. But it only lasted for a few seconds before something extraordinary happened. Jake began to sing. His voice was rough and hoarse, but the melody was clear and beautiful. It was a lullaby their mother had sung to them as children, a gentle song about love lasting forever. Amy heard the song through her pain. She stopped screaming and tried to join in, her voice weak but determined. Then, Mary the nurse began to hum along. She remembered the tune from when Jake had sung it in his crystal cell. One by one, the other human prisoners joined in. Their voices rose together, harmonizing in a sound of pure love and defiance. The effect was incredible. The large chamber, designed to amplify sounds of pain and fear, instead filled with the most beautiful music Zareth had ever heard. The human voices blended together like an orchestra, transforming suffering into art. Zareth found herself frozen, her hand on the torture device. She had expected screaming. She had expected Jake to break down and beg. She had expected the other prisoners to turn against him for causing Amy's pain. Instead, she was witnessing something she had never seen before. The humans were taking their pain and turning it into something beautiful. They were facing torture and death not with hatred, but with love. Amy's voice grew stronger as she sang. Even with the neural disruptor attacking her nervous system, she was finding the strength to make music. Her eyes were locked on Jake's, and in them Zareth saw not fear, but complete trust and love. Jake sang louder, pouring all his heart into the melody. He was watching his sister being tortured, but instead of breaking, he was giving her the gift of their childhood, the memory of their mother's love, the promise that no matter what happened, they would face it together. The other prisoners sang, with tears streaming down their faces. They were singing for Amy, for Jake, for all the families that had been torn apart by the war. They were singing for the world they had lost and the hope that someday it might be found again. Zareth looked around the room at her own soldiers and officers. The Kethra were staring at the humans in shock and confusion. Some looked uncomfortable. A few had actually taken steps back, as if the singing was somehow dangerous. For the first time in her life, Zareth felt small. She released the torture device. The humming stopped, but the singing continued. "Silence!" she shouted, but her voice cracked. The humans kept singing. "I said silence!" she screamed, drawing one of her swords. Jake looked directly at her while continuing the song. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger. There was only a deep sadness, as if he felt sorry for her. That look hit Zareth like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her sword falling from her hand. What had she become? What was she doing? She was torturing an innocent woman to force her brother to perform a meaningless gesture of submission. She was causing pain for the sake of pain. She was destroying something beautiful and calling it victory. The humans finished their song. The chamber fell silent except for Amy's labored breathing. Jake spoke into the quiet. "That was beautiful, Amy. Mom would have been proud." Amy managed to smile. "She's watching us, Jake. She knows we didn't forget who we are." Zareth stared at them in complete bewilderment. Amy had just been tortured, possibly permanently damaged, and she was talking about their dead mother with love and peace. "Take them back to their cells," Zareth said weakly. As the guards moved to obey, Jake called out to her, "Commander Zareth." She turned to look at him. "I forgive you," Jake said simply. The words hit Zareth like a hammer blow. She had been expecting hatred, threats, promises of revenge. Instead, this human who had every reason to despise her was offering forgiveness. "You forgive me?" she repeated stupidly. "You're just doing what you think is right," Jake said. "You're trying to bring order to chaos. I understand that, but There's a better way? There has to be. Zareth watched as the guards led Jake and Amy away. The siblings walked close together, Amy leaning on Jake's shoulder for support. Even after everything that had happened, they still had each other. For the first time in her adult life, Commander Zareth wept. She did not understand why she was crying. She only knew that something fundamental had changed inside her. The humans had shown her something she had never seen before. The power of love to transform suffering into beauty. The strength that came from refusing to let cruelty corrupt your soul. She had tried to break Jake Collins, and instead he had broken something in her. Something that had been hard and cold and certain was now cracking apart, letting in light she had never known existed. Zareth sat alone in her empty chamber and wondered what she was going to do now. That night, Commander Zareth could not stop thinking about the song. She sat in her office, staring at reports she could not focus on. Every few minutes, she would catch herself humming the human melody. She had tortured Amy Turner for 20 minutes with the neural disruptor. The medical scanners showed damage to the young woman's nervous system. Amy would probably have difficulty walking for the rest of her life. She might lose feeling in her hands, ending her career as a doctor. And yet Amy had sung. Even while being tortured, she had made something beautiful. Zareth tried to imagine herself in the same situation. If someone was torturing her sister, would she sing? If someone was destroying her body, would she think about love and family? She knew the answer. She would fight with rage and hatred. She would promise terrible revenge. She would curse her enemies and call for their destruction. But the humans had done something different. They had responded to cruelty with beauty, to hatred with love, to despair with hope. Zareth walked to the window of her office. Outside, she could see the lights of the human work camps. Thousands of prisoners labored in the factories, building weapons and supplies for the Kethra war machine. She had always seen them as resources, tools to be used and discarded. Now she wondered what songs they sang when no one was listening. What memories did they share to keep their spirits alive? What dreams did they still carry despite everything that had been taken from them? A soft chime indicated someone was at her door. Zareth was not expecting any visitors. "Enter," she called. To her surprise, it was Seklon, her intelligence officer. The thin Kethra looked nervous, which was unusual for him. "Commander," he said, hesitantly, "I have received new orders from High Command." "What orders?" Seklon held out a data pad. "You are to execute the prisoner Jake Collins tomorrow morning. High Command has decided that his influence on other prisoners has become too dangerous. They want to make an example of him." Zareth took the datapad with hands that shook slightly. She read the orders twice to make sure she understood them correctly. "They want a public execution," she said. "Yes, Commander. All prisoners are to watch. High Command believes that seeing Jake Collins die will break the resistance spirit he has inspired." Zareth stared at the orders for a long time. Finally, she looked up at Seklon. "What do you think will happen when the humans see Jake Collins? Executed?" she asked. Seklon seemed surprised by the question. "They will realize the futility of resistance. They will submit to Kethra authority." "Will they?" Zareth set down the datapad. "Or will they see a man who died rather than surrender his principles? Will they see proof that the human spirit cannot be conquered, only destroyed?" I do not understand, Commander." Zareth walked to the window again. "Neither did I until today." She dismissed Seklon and spent the rest of the night alone with her thoughts. By morning, she had made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to the execution ground, Zareth went to Jake's cell. She found him sitting quietly in the corner, his eyes closed in what might have been meditation or prayer. "Jake Collins," she said. He opened his eyes and looked at her without surprise, as if he had been expecting her. "Commander," he said politely. Zareth studied his face. Despite weeks of imprisonment and torture, there was still something unbroken in his expression. Not defiance now, but a quiet peace that she envied. "Do you know why I'm here?" she asked. "I assume you're going to kill me," Jake said calmly. The guards have been acting different today, more nervous. Are you afraid? Jake considered the question seriously. Yes and no. I'm afraid of pain. I'm afraid for Amy and the other prisoners. But I'm not afraid of dying for something that matters. What matters enough to die for? The idea that every person has dignity. The belief that love is stronger than hatred. The hope that someday, somehow, things will be better. Zareth felt that strange ache in her chest again. You really believe these things? I have to. If I don't believe them, then what's the point of any of this? Zareth was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question that had been haunting her all night. Why did you forgive me yesterday? Jake looked surprised. You're thinking about that? I cannot stop thinking about it. I have tortured you and your sister. I have caused you pain beyond measure. You should hate me. Why don't you? Jake stood up slowly and walked to the crystal wall that separated them. Up close, Zareth could see how much the imprisonment had changed him. He was thinner, scarred, exhausted, but his eyes were still kind. Because hatred would make me like you, Jake said gently. And I don't want to be like you. The words stung, but Zareth knew they were not meant to be cruel. You think I am evil, she said. I think you're lost, Jake replied. I think you've spent so long being strong that you've forgotten what strength is really for. What is strength for? Protecting people who can't protect themselves. Building instead of destroying. Choosing love even when it's harder than choosing hatred. Zareth pressed her hand against the crystal wall. For a moment she imagined that she could reach through and touch this strange human who had turned her world upside down. High Command has ordered me to execute you this morning, she said. Jake nodded. I figured. They want all the prisoners to watch. They think seeing you die will break their spirits. Maybe it will, Jake said. Or maybe it will remind them that some things are worth dying for. Zareth made her decision. No, she said. It will not. She stepped back from the crystal wall and pulled out her personal communicator. After a few moments, she spoke into it. Security Team Alpha, report to Cell Block 7 immediately. We have a prisoner transport to prepare. Jake looked at her, in confusion. What are you doing? Zareth smiled. The first genuine smile she had worn in years. Something I should have done weeks ago, she said. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself in a transport vehicle with Amy and 6 other human prisoners. They were not in chains. The guards were not carrying weapons. Most surprising of all, Commander Zareth was driving the vehicle herself. Where are we going? Amy asked. Her voice was weak from the neural damage, but she was alert. To the human settlement 20 kilometers south of here, Zareth replied without taking her eyes off the road. There is an active resistance cell. There. They will help you reach free territory. Jake stared at the back of Zareth's head in amazement. Why are you doing this? Zareth was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. Because you taught me something I had forgotten, she said. You taught me what it means to be truly strong. They drove in silence through the alien landscape. The other prisoners whispered among themselves, hardly daring to believe they were really being freed. When they reached the meeting point, Zareth stopped the vehicle but did not get out. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. There will be consequences for this, she said. High Command will court-martial me. I will probably be executed. Come with us, Jake said impulsively. You could defect, start over. Zareth turned to look at him. There were tears running down her alien face. The first tears she had shed since childhood. I have too much blood on my hands, too many crimes to answer for, but perhaps... She paused, struggling with words. Perhaps I can find a way to make amends. Jake reached forward and touched her shoulder. It's never too late to choose. To do the right thing. Zareth covered his hand with one of her own. Her skin was warm and surprisingly soft. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me another way. The human prisoners climbed out of the vehicle. As they walked away into the darkness, Jake turned back one last time. Zareth was still sitting in the driver's seat, tears falling onto her boots. The same boots she had once commanded him to lick. Now those boots were being washed by tears of understanding, of regret, of hope for redemption. Jake wanted to go back to her, to tell her that forgiveness was possible for everyone. But Amy tugged on his arm and he knew they had to keep moving. As they disappeared into the night, Zareth started the engine and began driving back to face whatever punishment awaited her. But for the first time in her life, she was not afraid. She had learned what it meant to be human. 3 months later, reports reached the human resistance about a Kethra commander who had been executed for treason. Before her death, she had smuggled intelligence about alien military positions to the human underground. Her actions had saved thousands of lives and turned the tide of several battles. Her name was Zareth, and she had died singing a human lullaby. Jake. Collins never learned about Zareth's fate. He was too busy helping to organize the growing resistance movement, teaching other fighters about the power of dignity and hope. But sometimes, on quiet nights, he would remember the alien commander who had wept over her own boots, and he would smile, knowing that somewhere in the darkness another soul had found its way to the light. The war was not over. There would be more battles, more suffering, more difficult choices ahead. But Jake Collins had proven something important. He had shown that the human spirit could not be conquered. He had demonstrated that one person standing up for what was right could change the world. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything.